we're now getting the rafters ready to set out, so that we can set the rafters out. We need to find the centre because the rafters are tapered. Tapered rafters are very common in medieval buildings, most likely because trees are tapered when in their growing state, and the carpenters would square up a tree with an axe and you would get a tapered rafter. So now we're going to flick a line through the centre so that it will aid us to set the rafter out.
Want to do it?
Victor's going to show you how you do it. If you use a rule on the side, you can find the half distance easily. And we're going to do at the top of the rafter. And we're going to flick a line through the centre so we can set out and get a square cut. So we're going to flick a line through. Yeah. And this line has coloured chalk, powdered chalk, could be lamp black, soot. They used to use all sorts of materials to mark a line, and we've now also done this other rafter, and you can see the line on that one. The next stage now, we need to get a plumb line square so we can then set out the rafter. We're going to do a plumb now using a square, and because we can set the square on the baseline, we can then draw a line across, and we now can draw an accurate line. Now we're going to turn the rafter over on its edge, and when the rafter is in the roof position, we've got the tie beam on its side, remember, and the rafter on the roof will be in that plane. It'll be wide on the side of the roof, and on the parallel section of the rafter is parallel all the way. And on the tie beam, we've now marked out where it's going to join. This is going to be cut out to fit over the wall plate, and a dovetail joint will be set out on the soffit and cut out, and then that will be fitted into the wall plate, and that will then stop the wall plates moving out, and then the rafters, this tie beam will be secure, and we're going to set out the rafter so we can then set out a mortise for the rafter to go into the top. So we're going to use the top of the corner of the wall plate. If I use my pencil, you can see that is going to be the top of the wall plate, because it's housed out for the dovetail joint. We then line up the exact position of the mark we've made on the side of the rafter, and we've lined it up where the wall plate will be. We now want to find what the length of the rafter is, and we can use the rod, or we can use the dividers to measure the length of the rafter.
What do you want to use?
Well, we lay the rod on, and we have numbered each increment with a number, and we've used Roman numerals in this case, and to get the length we could use the rod. Now, if we use if we use 12, that will give us a picture of a roof at 48 degrees. If we go to 13 on the mark, that will give us a pitch of 52 degrees. If we then go the next one up, which is 14, that gives us 55 degrees, and then 15 will give us 58. And of course, if you go to the end, which would be 16 units, then that would be an equilateral triangle of 60 degrees. So we're going to do 48 degrees on this roof, which would be suitable for peg tiles. If you're going to use thatch, you probably want a steeper pitch, 52 or 55. Or if you want to go for a shallower pitch, say at 10 or 11, then you can have 43 degrees or 37 degrees. So pitches can be determined by marking the length of the rafter. No geometry, just using the units of measurement that we took off the tie beam, which is on the rod. And alternatively, we don't need to use a rod, we could use the dividers. So there's two methods. One method, if we use a rod, then there's no risk of error because you'll have the numbers on there. But a skilled carpenter who can count very well can use the dividers and not make an error. So we can either go out with the dividers or we'll go out with the rod. While we got the rod here, could you pass me the dividers? We would take the dividers at that point there, and then it would be, we would stride it out down the rafter. And as you can see, the point of the rafter lines up perfectly with our units, which of course it would. So we're now, while we've got the rod there, let's mark it out on the rod. So we're going to go for 12 units. Well, we've got 8. What's that? 14, 10.
10, 11,
12. And we got 12 there. I'm going to square down. Do you want to put it on edge and you know where it is roughly? And you can clearly see the marks on the rod. And we're going to mark out exactly where we want it to go. So that then we square across with our square. If I do it that way, that will give us our rafter length. That's the length of our rafter. And also, we're going to put in the position of the collar. And the collar will go in at 6 units. In this case, wrong way round.
Oh,
Isn't it?
is it? Yes, it is. Yeah, you've got the higher.
Then we're going to... Now the collar can be of various widths, being a crown post roof. In this case,
7. You want 6?
5, 6. In this case, we're going for 6, but it can be 7 or 8, and very common on crown post roof, it's 1/3. So we're going to mark 6 here. Can you see it?
Yep.
There. If it wants to be 1/3, then we can take the string, divide it into 3, and that is 1/3. And so to get 1/3, you go from the top and mark down and that would be 1/3 of the pitch of the roof, which was very common on medieval roofs. Now we've got these marks clearly marked on the timbers, the rafter timbers. We're now going to set up the apex. I'm going to line this up exactly the same as that rafter there, and if you lift it onto that one, outside measurement, outside mark to outside mark, yeah. You're right, yeah. So outside mark to outside mark. So Victor's lining up the two outside marks, and now we can use the plumb bob and drop down so we can make a joint, which would be a bridle joint, or it could be a halving joint. Medieval people used either. So we're now setting out the apex joint, and I will now get a collar timber so we can mark out the collar timber. Great. Now that we've set out the apex, and when that joint has been fitted, we then pick up these points there. If you could point out, Victor, that point. And I've got the other point here, which is 6 units. Once they're joined together, we'd lay a collar timber across onto those marks. Yeah, but once this apex joined, we can then mark up the collar. And the collar is all set out from the back mark onto the rafter. This then will be a consistent measurement for the collar. And under the collar, you'll have the collar purlin, which will be supported onto a crown post. And when we will demonstrate the next thing is when we assemble all this together, we'll show you how to fix the collar and how to fix the crown post. The rafters have now been cut from the setting out we did. So we now cut the joints, and we've now made mortise in the top of the tie beam for the rafter foot to go in, which we've done on both ends. And we've also done a saddle joint on the end at the apex, so it all will fit nicely together. And it's all held in together with augering holes to put pegs in. And in medieval times they would use a shell auger, which would be, to start it, would be very difficult. And they started a shell auger using a gouge. And you'd start by going around the edge of where you want to drill the hole to score it, and then that would make the point of the auger to bite in. And then slowly and laboriously you would auger the hole, and you bore it right through to the other side. And maybe that's where a boring job came in, because the labourers would be endlessly boring holes all day long. We're going to bore holes through into the base of the rafter, and we're going to do the apex. Victor's now going to do the hole, but we're going to use a modern power drill, which makes life so much easier and less boring. And he's going to sink the hole right through so that we can then put a peg in, temporary, to hold the rafters together. And before you go right through, sometimes you can go through from the other side, but depends on how much timber comes out the back. Now we're going to assemble the rafters together. Are we ready? Into the mortises.
Side. Yeah, you do that.
Yep. And we offset the hole for the tenon, and also on this tenon
Do you want to do it?
we mark it either with the tip of the drill, and we go offset and we slightly move it towards the shoulder, and when we bang the peg in it pulls it in tight. That's what we call draw boring, and we can just mark it with the tip.
Yeah, it's pretty good. We can do
Yeah.
it. That one.
Just gently, and we do the same there. And we do the same there. And we're fitting, making sure that rafters fit tightly into the mortise. We're going to bore a hole now and we're going to offset the hole, and we're going to bore it through on the tenon. Wants to come slightly this way because it's a double joint, so you just bring it to the shoulder.
Slightly to the shoulder.
Yeah,
Slightly there. Because we want also the tenon to
that's
go
it.
there.
So you come down a bit.
Come down
Yeah.
onto the shoulder.
Or you could go straight through, it wouldn't matter here.
No, because
Go straight through.
I was
centre.
I was thinking as
Yeah. On the apex, we were just discussing that do we need to offset? Probably not. You could go straight through on the centre. Because it's not crucial for the joint to be tight, but it would be where we want it to sit on top of the tie beam, because we don't want the rafters to move.
Do you want to do
Um,
this now?
Don't need to do that now.
No?
At the moment, we're not going to bother to secure this one at the moment. We're just going to hold that temporary together with a peg. So we can just remove it. Quite often you'd use a metal pin or a peg that you could slip out. It's varied. Right, we've now assembled the rafters, and now we're going to set out the collar. We now have the collar in place, and we're going to mark the collar here, but mainly we're going to mark the collar on the inside of the rafter this time, because it will either fit as a mortise joint or it could be a dovetail halving. Now, the advantage of doing a dovetail halving would be that you wouldn't have to take these rafters apart. You can cut a dovetail halving in situ, and you could cut the collar and just drop it into place, which is quite common. However, we're just going to set it out. We're not going to make the joint. We're just going to show how it's set out. And we use a plumb bob on the inside face of the rafter. And we're going to mark the inside face
You want that one?
of the collar. We then take our string there, and we stretch our string between the two, fold it in half, and we can find the centre of the collar. From the rod, we can set out the centre of the tie beam from using the measurements on the rod, and from there the crown post and the collar purling can be set out. Yeah? Shall we get the crown post and just set it in? So recap, we've used the setting out marks for the collar based on the mark we put on the back of the rafters, which was set out from the rod. Once we now have fixed the collar, we were able to set out the crown post and we're able to set out the collar purling. That stage is now complete. The next stage we're going to do is how to set out the intermediate rafters.